When we look at the big problems facing us today, climate, war, politics, women's health, they can feel overwhelming, insurmountable even. This is largely because people seem to be so divided. Other people can seem so unknowable. Sometimes it is like half the world has lost its mind. But the thing is, we need to find a way past these divisions if we're going to tackle the big problems facing us all. We need to find our common ground and our common good. We need, in other words, to have empathy for one another. Empathy is the action of understanding the thoughts, feelings, or experiences of another person. It is this magical ability to take on someone else's perspective and see the world through their eyes. Empathy is an essential part of problem solving, and happily, it isn't a fixed or finite resource. We can grow and strengthen empathy like a muscle. So how do we do that? It might surprise you to hear that the answer is reading. Yes, reading. Neurologists have been studying the way empathy manifests in the brain by putting people in MRI machines. They look at the different parts of the brain that activate when people experience empathy. These parts of the brain form what we call the mentalizing system. The mentalizing system activates when we witness an emotion in someone else, but, and this is key, it only activates when we understand the context of that emotion. For example, say I visit my neighbor and she's telling me a story about work and I see this emotion on her face. Now, she could be about to give me good news, or it could be bad news. I can't tell from her ambiguous expression. It isn't until I hear her story that she's getting a bonus this year that I understand that she's happy. And my mentalizing system activates, and I feel happy too, because now I understand what my neighbor is feeling and why. Now, what is really interesting is that when the mentalizing system activates, a second part of the brain, the septal region, also activates. The septal region is a part of the brain associated with pro-social or helping behavior, and so the fact that it activates alongside the mentalizing system suggests that experiencing empathy impacts behavior in pro-social ways. Having felt empathy for my neighbor, I may be more likely to, say, offer to take her garbage cans to the curb on my way out. Not only does empathy make us feel closer to and more understanding of the people around us, we actually act in a more pro-social way when our mentalizing system and septal region have been activated. Now, here's where reading comes into play. Our mentalizing system and septal region, they activate through interactions with real people, but they also activate when we read a piece of really great fiction. That's because when we read fiction, we are getting the context or the story of a character's experience. And if we were reading that fiction in an MRI machine, we would see the empathetic systems of our brain are activating as we come to understand a story from a character's perspective. Reading fiction not only lets us practice engaging in empathy, we actually have that experience. We are strengthening our empathetic muscles, and we're doing so in a way that actually impacts our lives in positive ways. Let me show you what I mean. I am going to read you the opening of a short story called Puppy by George Saunders. As we read this together, see if any of the emotions or experiences of the main character reflect your life experience. Saunders writes, "Twice already, Marie had pointed out the brilliance of the autumnal sun on the perfect field of corn, because the brilliance of the autumnal sun on the perfect field of corn put her in mind of a haunted house. And not just any haunted house, not a haunted house she had ever actually seen, but a mythical one that appeared in her mind with adjacent graveyard and cat on a fence whenever she saw the brilliance of the autumnal sun on the et cetera, and she wanted to make sure that if the kids had a corresponding mythical haunted house that appeared in their minds whenever they saw the brilliance of the et cetera, it would come up now. So they could all experience it together, like friends, like college friends on a trip, sans pot. Here, Marie keeps pointing out a cornfield to her kids because she wants them to see what she sees. A cornfield that evokes the spooky image of a Platonic haunted house with adjacent graveyard and cat on a fence. And her kids have none of it, right? They have no interest in engaging with her at all. How many parents have had this experience, right? Where you have something cool and meaningful to share and your kids just have no interest? Or maybe you've had the experience of finally convincing your friend to sit down and watch your favorite TV show, but when they do, they just stay on their phone the whole time. Or maybe you've been on vacation and you took a picture of the most gorgeous sunset, but when you take it home and show it to people, it just looks like any old sunset. What has happened here is if you've related to any of these experiences, your mentalizing system and septal region have been activated. You have experienced empathy. Good job. Now, it's not just reading any kind of fiction that activates our empathetic system and works out our empathetic muscles. It's reading something very specific, and that is literary fiction. What is literary fiction? The passage we just read is an example of it, but it's fiction that is focused on the emotions and psychology of characters and situations that are complex and ambiguous. These stories require context for us to understand what the character is feeling. Literary stories are nuanced, like real relationships. They are, in a word, unpredictable. And it is this unpredictability that allows us to practice empathy while reading. When we read about complex, unpredictable people in fiction, we get to practice engaging with the complex, unpredictable people in our real lives. One of the reasons we know this is true is that not all kinds of reading have this same effect on empathy. Reading nonfiction, or reading genre fiction, which we often call like romance or horror, fantasy or sci-fi. This type of reading doesn't have the same impact on empathy. In fact, studies show that if you read exclusively nonfiction or genre fiction, it can actually have a negative impact on empathy. Perhaps because the predictable nature of genre fiction or the feeling of acquiring knowledge that reading nonfiction gives us reaffirms our understanding of the world rather than inviting us to practice seeing the world from another's perspective. Not enough of us are reading literary fiction. In 2022, less than 20% of American adults read a piece of literary fiction, and we are missing out on huge empathetic gains because of it. In a world where we are facing serious problems that will require cooperation and shared perspectives to solve, literary fiction is cheap, readily available, portable way of having real-world impact, positive impacts on the world. And we can't say that necessarily about new medicines or technologies or therapies, so we should take advantage of it. So, if you would like to strengthen your empathetic skills, if you would like to become a better problem solver, if you would like to unlock your best self for your friends and family and neighbors. Start reading literary fiction. I recommend starting with short stories. That's a great way to get all of the empathetic gains while still being able to finish a story in one setting. Here are examples of some great short story collections. So I recommend you go to your local independent bookstore, pick up a copy of one of these books, or better yet, pick up two and find a friend to read with. When we read with other people and hear how they understand a story, we get even more empathetic practice. You, your loved ones, and even the world will be better for it. Thank you.